when we plan back and forth between the parish and my office about a mass or a celebration, there's a lot of conversations, and Father Jones, thank you for taking care of all of that. And I end up with kind of my sheet of do's and don'ts, right? And on the side of it, on this one, it says, simple parish mass. I didn't think so. And thank God it's not, because it is good for us to celebrate in that way that we celebrate as faithful people. We are not the reveling people of the Old Testament around the golden calf, but we are celebrating with a joy of heart in a moment like this that seeks to enter deeply into our faith, into the gift that we have been given and the responsibility that we've been given, because 100 years reminds us that there is a responsibility given, received, passed on, and still being lived. So we're celebrating this evening a Mass in gratitude for the 100th anniversary of St. Thomas the Apostle Parish in Crystal Lake. And the diocesan history records that 100 years ago, Crystal Lake received its first permanent pastor 100 years ago. And that was an important step in the history of the steady and then almost explosive growth that took place in this area that was originally kind of a back and forth combination between Barrington and Crystal Lake. And it's that whole confluence of faith in the church and the decisions of bishops and so on that we are the ones who now bear the result of that here in this parish. That's our history. And it's good for us to see how God has moved in this area that so benefits us now. So much of the history of the parish and of our faith and practice has with it the names and the realities of the priests and pastors who were here. And for that reason, I'm especially grateful for this turnout of priests, my brother priests, who are here, and all of them with connections to this parish. Father Evans couldn't be here, but I understand he sent his regrets. Saturday evening, it's not always easy to find coverage to get off. Monsignor Hermes, it's so great to see you. Father Worth is here. To all of you, brothers, welcome home. And you're following on the names like Father Layden, Father Lonergan, Father McCormick. Boy, I love to hear those Irish names. But the point is that as great as that personal reality is that's comprised of the priests who are here and the priests that many of you have known, it is that spiritual reality that we think of this evening in the 100 years. That's one part of the life of a parish, but it's an important one. And through the priests, the ones who had a talent in this, the ones who had a talent in that, the ones who I liked, the ones I liked a little bit less, we know that's the whole story of parishes and humanity. But through all of that, in 100 years, has been this flow of grace that Christ has blessed you with. And how good it is to have our priests here this evening. The other thing that strikes one is, I think sometimes it's not emphasized enough, the patron saint of a parish. The patron saint of a parish is very important because there's a special spiritual intercessor that we have. I wonder if we're not going to meet our intercessors in heaven. St. Thomas would be one of them, to say that I knew you were in my parish and I was praying for you. Intercessors and models for the faithful of the parish of the whole area here. St. Thomas the Apostle has his feast tomorrow, and we should stop and think about what a great intercessor he is for the parish. There's two particular quotes in the gospel that I hope would be for those associated with this parish that is named for him, that we would be thinking about them. They would mark and inspire our faith. And the first is his most famous quote. After refusing to believe the witness of the others in the resurrection, that Christ was there among them, and we might say we can almost understand his reticence. Perhaps that news was just too good. It was too good to be true, because it was such an invitation to have your hope and your love dashed again, as they had been on Good Friday, to see the one that they had loved and followed, beaten so badly, crucified and killed. But we know the story that Christ then appears a second time. And with that slight but very real rebuke, he invites Thomas to come and even imagine, touch the wounds, now the glorified wounds. And then there is the words of Thomas for our faith. My Lord and my God. That should be underlying our faith in so many different ways, in so many ways of the particular manner in which God calls each of you and graces you. Underneath that is that act of belief, my Lord and my God. Thomas is a model then for that struggle of faith that many people have. Faith is not easy. It's a gift, and we have to work at it. But Thomas trusts, and so should we. Another aspect of my Lord and my God. As you may know, a couple of weeks ago, the Church in the United States began what's going to be a 3-year program to try and stimulate again, encourage, build up, sort of blow the embers into flames of our faith in the Eucharist. Our faith in the true presence that the bread becomes the body, the wine becomes the blood. Christ's true presence. And I'm reminded that way back those many years ago in grade school, the sisters taught us that at that moment that the priest at Mass raises the host, having taken on the person of Christ, having changed the bread into the body of Christ, and he holds it up, that internally each of us was to say, my Lord and my God, as a means of offering myself and accepting in faith what Christ teaches us and what is at the center of our faith, that here is not just the memory but the very presence of Christ himself. I hope for all of you that that's practice, especially in this parish. Then there's the second quote. It's in the Gospel of John, where Jesus has resolved that he's going to go to Jerusalem, and the apostles know of the tensions, and they know of the dangers that this is going to be. It is going to lead to the crucifixion. And if you remember, Thomas says to the apostles, let us go to die also with him. Words for each of you who are members of this parish. What a spiritual reminder it is of why we need the church, why we need the sacraments, why we need teaching. Every one of us will die. Let's go and die with him. That is ultimately what the faith is strengthening us to do. It is purifying our vision to see that is not a horrible thing, that is the best thing that could happen. With Thomas the Apostle, let us go and die with him. I have a special devotion to St. Thomas. I think it was 30 years ago tomorrow, actually. 30 years ago, I was working for the church in Pakistan, and you may know that part of the story of Thomas is that he went to and worked in to begin the church in India, and there he was martyred. Pakistan at that point was a part of India. And 30 years ago tomorrow, I was taken to a little village called Taxila in the plains of the Punjab, because it is a place that is venerated by the Christians in Pakistan from time immemorial as one of the stops that Thomas made. Huge crowd that comes. And the story behind that stop, is that in Taxila was the local king Gondophares. And so Thomas, as the missionary, went to see Gondophares. And Gondophares received him well, didn't accept the faith. But he saw in this intelligent guy, he said, I've been thinking about and planning on building myself a new palace, a huge palace, this one getting run down. Would you do that? Could you do that? And he says, sure. And so Gondophares gives him a bag of money, which Thomas immediately goes and distributes to the poor. Well, Gondophares is not happy, calls him in, and he condemns him to death. But Gondophares' brother takes seriously ill, and they say, you have this holy man here. His brother dies in a Lazarus-like experience, and Thomas raises him. The brother tells Gondophares that in that moment of his death, he saw heaven, and there was Thomas showing him. He says, this is the palace that I am building for Gondophares. All of this coming together simply to say, we are here in the parish of Thomas the Apostle. And that should not be simply a matter of routine, simply a matter of we had to have some name on our parish. It should be that kind of a living reality. When we celebrate a parish anniversary too, isn't it good for us to think of that mix of earthly and what is eternal that has gone on in the parish in these last 100 years? We need to stir up again our gratitude and our astonishment for what goes on here on a regular basis and has gone on all that time. Think of how many in 100 years are the baptisms. How many of you are baptized in St. Thomas Parish? Anybody? Sometimes I ask questions like that, I kind of have to wait for the hands. What about marriages? How many of you were married in this parish? And think of all of those multiplied by the numbers that were, and think of the grace that was given, not just to those who've raised their hands, but to the individuals for 100 years who have been the parishioners here. And with those graces, for example, the grace of marriage comes the grace of family that has gone with that has been extended out into other generations. The grace to know how to take the joys and to weather the sorrows. The grace to know how to forgive. The grace to encourage each other in faith. Think about all of the sins that have been forgiven in this parish, in all of the confessions that have taken place, maybe the large ones like you have for Christmas and Easter, or even those quiet Saturday nights where the priest was sitting there kind of looking at his watch, waiting for the period to end, and you heard the quiet footsteps and somebody who needed it came in. The point is, this is a place where holiness and grace is encountered, received, lived out, shared. A place where even the fellowship of all of the gatherings that you've ever had, everything to the most formal to the spaghetti dinner on some Saturday evening, all of those things are moments and times and places that are the life of a parish and that help us to live out our faith not simply on our knees, not simply in our recitation of the catechism, but in that personal encounter with Christ and that personal encounter with each other. It is then for us, especially to take to heart the intention of this Mass that we heard announced at the beginning, for the parishioners, living and dead. We should be praying for all of the members of this parish who are in purgatory, still trusting in our prayers for that final purification. We should be praying to them, asking them who are now reigning on high to be looking over us if for no other reason than I have followed you through this parish. We should be praying for all of the donors. This building didn't just pop up like a mushroom. It took planning. It took donations, as did the prior church. It takes that to continue to maintain and keep this to be a worthy place that welcomes us in our worship, in our praise. We should be praying for all of the priests who have ever served here, who've ever said Mass here, any of the sisters who've ever been here, all of the deacons who have been here, all of those who in any way have contributed to this life of the parish, because we are bound to each other by a living faith, and we will see it even more fully when we come to our reward in heaven and see those others. 100 years. I suppose we could send around a document and we could all promise we'll be here next time, another 100 years. Well, what would it hurt, right? But it makes the point. What a blessing it is to have a parish where we come and fall on our knees and pray and tabernacle and know that altar and know so many of the people around us and know that pastor and know each other. Congratulations, and what a great blessing.